Hello there, Panda. Glad to see you getting here early. So, remind me, what was the bomb stuff? Hey, Nameless, welcome. Glad to see you. How is everyone doing today? Ah, that game. How did that work out? Did anyone explode? You know, love the guy, but that doesn't surprise me. I have heard him playing games. Him exploding does not surprise me. Welcome, Bella. Oh, Panda was just telling me about her and Raven playing Keep Talking and No One Explodes. Apparently Raven exploded. Lots. Wow. Okay. So they were screams of terror, huh? Okay. That's better than angry yelling. What about you, Nameless? What have you been up to? You popped in the Discord the other day, but then kind of popped out really quick. It was good to hear your voice, though. By the way, for those of you who end up listening to this later, and those of you who are just joining us, we do have a Discord available for the entire bedtime community. It's free. It's open to anybody that wants to join, and it's full of interesting people. And the links are just below. They are on the Twitch. And hey, look at that right there in the chat. That was well timed. I did not do that on purpose. I know you have a voice. You have a good voice. It was a very pleasant voice. I'd like to hear more of it in the future. But please join the Discord, come hang out with us. We get together there sometimes to play some games. That's where we hung out during the watch party, which I thought after the initial technical difficulties went pretty well. I really enjoyed the movie and enjoyed watching it with you. I'm working on trying to figure out how to incorporate the Discord chat without the endless echo effect. Because that part was horrible. Not that I don't like hearing all of you, but hearing everyone 30 or 40 times in a constantly diminishing echo was not great for watching the movie. And until somebody tells me otherwise, I am totally convinced that Hoggle is the namesake for Hogwarts in Harry Potter. So if anybody wants to prove me wrong and find a different provenance for it from some interview or something, go ahead and post that in the Discord. But until that happens, I am sticking with the explanation that it's Hoggle from the Labyrinth who inspired the name for Hogwarts. I think it's a good explanation. And, some of the scenes, like the helping hands, playing right into the Devil's Snare scene. Those seem to translate pretty well. And I'm glad that everybody that was able to came and joined us for that. I do think we're going to be doing that pretty regularly. I'm going to try again, same time slot this coming Sunday. And we'll see how that goes. And then, depending on how that goes, we will look at either doing it weekly or bi-weekly, I think. We did pick up a couple new followers that didn't get the notifications during that stream. So we picked up Katie and Corey C. and Who Sparky and JMath. So thank you, all of you, for the follows. Really appreciate it. Speaking of follows, we have been closing rapidly on affiliate, which is amazing since I haven't even been doing this a month. But I've made a decision on that. And I'll go over that briefly here, but I'll put in a more thorough explanation of my decision in the Discord. I have decided that even once we hit the affiliate requirements, which should be any day now, I am not going to pick up affiliate with Twitch. Looking at it and looking over the contract and doing a cost benefits, it's just not worth it. The contract gives Twitch the rights to my brand likeness, ownership of all of my content, everything, for basically nothing. For the privilege of them taking half of anything you guys are generous enough to spend on me, and there's no real benefit versus what we have right now. Plus, they'll play pre-roll ads on all of my stuff for 30 seconds at the beginning of each stream, and that's kind of annoying because I've got no control over what's advertised on it or what plays or how long it is, and we get nothing from it. There's no benefit to the community for it, because until it's got 1,000 impressions, there's no money paid, which means it doesn't support the stream. It doesn't let me do more for you guys. It doesn't benefit me or you. So I don't think I'm going to do affiliate. However, some people have been pressuring me for a way to contribute financially to the stream. She in particular wants to make sure I get a tea warmer. So I will be opening up a Patreon here in the next day or two for those who care to support. Not required. I'm going to continue making content. Ban that guy. Why do they keep showing up? It's that same site too. What was I saying? Those who do want to support, you're welcome. I'm going to put up subscriber tiers and that kind of thing, and I'll figure out some benefits. I was going to do a private reading of modern content for subscriber supporters, so we'll figure out a good tier for that. And there's Discord integrations available and that kind of thing. I thought maybe thank you, Vela. Maybe a good higher tier reward would be I don't know, me recording a voicemail or some other message for you if you wanted, a ringtone of your choice, something like that. I don't know. If you have any ideas on that, there's a section in the Discord. Throw them in there. Let me know. But like I said, I'll go into more detail in the Discord about the whys and all, and I'll link the affiliate contract so you guys can see it for yourself. But I didn't say there was anything wrong. I just said, you did put a little pressure, which is cool. I love it. I love the support. You're awesome and amazing. But I don't want you to feel obligated. Yeah. So. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Anyway, enough of the talk about finance and affiliate and all that. I did promise a brief Kana story, though, before we get started. So Kana has this trick that she's learned when she wants to wake you up. So she will crawl onto your chest and lay full length down your chest and reach forward and lick the tip of your nose. Just the tip of your nose. And then she'll wait and she'll stare. And I know she stares because I've opened my eyes to see little puppy eyes staring at me, just waiting for a reaction. And if you don't react soon enough, she'll go in and she'll lick the tip of your nose again. And she'll just keep doing that. And eventually, if you really are being stubborn about wanting to sleep, she'll kind of at you. Just to let you know that you should be awake and paying attention to what she wants. So, the other day, she got me. She did more than just the nose. Like, she licked my nostril and my mouth, and I woke up and I was like, and every time I finished getting it off and moved my hand away just a little bit, she did it again. She got me like 3 or 4 times in a row like that, just full on the face. It was so cute. It's so gross. Oh. But, yeah, Kana got me. She was cute earlier, though. I took a nap before the stream, and I laid down, and she snuggled up beside me. I am not eating the puppy. That is not going to happen. But she snuggled up beside me and laid down and laid her head in the crook of my elbow next to me, which is adorable, for about a minute, maybe 2. And then she started snoring. Oh, she snores so loud. To be fair, cats are little psychopaths, and they're also significantly smaller than a dog. Conan may be a puppy, but she is a sizable puppy. Yeah. Still likes being a lap dog. Except apparently during the watch party for popcorn. That might be because I dropped a piece or 2 on the floor and she did not want to be that far from her prize. So, in any case, that's my Kana story, as promised. I'm glad you thought she was adorable. She's pretty cute. I am still planning on doing some Kana gifts and that kind of thing for reactions and whatnot. But I decided that today we'd go ahead and read one more Conan story, because the last one was just so fun to read. It was just such great, chewy language. Like it I know you guys are going to make this dirty, but it felt good to have those words in my mouth. But those of you who have just joined us, we're going to go ahead and dive into the story now. And thank you for being here, whether you're ending your day with me or beginning it or somewhere in the middle. But wherever you are, it's obviously bedtime. And I don't know what's not phrase. But we're going to dive into another Conan story. Hopefully the story ends up being as enjoyable as the previous one, and the author continues his surprising treatment of women characters in his books. I was pleased with that. It was good, much better than I thought it would be. So, Chapter 1, The Hour of the Dragon. O sleeper, awake! The long tapers flickered, sending the black shadows wavering along the walls, and the velvet tapestries rippled. Yet there was no wind in the chamber. 4 men stood about the ebony table on which lay the green sarcophagus that gleamed like carven jade. In the upraised right hand of each man, a curious black candle burned with a weird greenish light. Outside was night and a lost wind moaning among the black trees. Inside the chamber was tense silence and the wavering of the shadows, while 4 pairs of eyes, burning with intensity, were fixed on the long green case, across which cryptic hieroglyphics writhed, as if lent life and movement by the unsteady light. The man at the foot of the sarcophagus leaned over it and moved his candle as if he were writing with a pen, inscribing a mystic symbol in the air. Then he set down the candle and its black gold stick at the foot of the case, and mumbling some formula unintelligible to his companions, he thrust a broad white hand into his fur-trimmed robe. When he brought it forth again, it was as if he cupped in his palm a ball of living fire. The other 3 drew in their breath sharply, and the dark, powerful man who stood at the head of the sarcophagus whispered, "The heart of Ahriman." The other lifted a quick hand for silence. Somewhere, a dog began howling dolefully, and a stealthy step padded outside the barred and bolted door. But none looked aside from the mummy case, over which the man in the ermine-trimmed robe was now moving the great flaming jewel, while he muttered an incantation that was old when Atlantis sank. The glare of the gem dazzled their eyes, so that they could not be sure of what they saw. But with a splintering crash, the carven lid of the sarcophagus burst outward as if from some irresistible pressure applied from within, and the 4 men, bending eagerly forward, saw the occupant, a huddled, withered, wizened shape, with dried brown limbs like dead wood showing through moldering bandages. "Bring that thing back?" muttered the small, dark man who stood on the right with a short, sardonic laugh. "It is ready to crumble at a touch. We are fools. Shh!" It was an urgent hiss of command from the large man who held the jewel. Perspiration stood upon his broad white forehead, and his eyes were dilated. He leaned forward, and without touching the thing with his hand, laid on the breast of the mummy the blazing jewel. Then he drew back and watched with fierce intensity, his lips moving in soundless invocation. It was as if a globe of living fire flickered and burned on the dead, withered bosom, and breath sucked in, hissing through the clenched teeth of the watchers. For as they watched, an awful transmutation became apparent. The withered shape in the sarcophagus was expanding, was growing, lengthening. The bandages burst and fell into brown dust. The shriveled limbs swelled and straightened. Their dusky hue began to fade. "By Mitra," whispered the tall, yellow-haired man on the left. "He was not a Stygian. That part, at least, was true." Again a trembling finger warned for silence. The hound outside was no longer howling. He whimpered, as with an evil dream, and then that sound, too, died away in silence, in which the yellow-haired man plainly heard the straining of the heavy door, as if something outside pushed powerfully upon it. He half turned, his hand at his sword, but the man in the ermine robe hissed an urgent warning. "Stay! Do not break the chain, and on your life, do not go to the door." The yellow-haired man shrugged and turned back, and then he stopped short, staring. In the jade sarcophagus lay a living man, a tall, lusty man, naked, white of skin and dark of hair and beard. He lay motionless, his eyes wide open, and blank and unknowing as a newborn babe's. On his breast, the great jewel smoldered and sparkled. The man in ermine reeled as if from some letdown of extreme tension. "Ishtar," he gasped. "It is Zaltotun, and he lives! Valerius, Tarascus, Almeric, do you see? Do you see? You doubted me, but I have not failed. We have been close to the open gates of hell this night, and the shapes of darkness have gathered close about us. Aye, they followed him to the very door, but we have brought the great magician back to life. And damned our souls to purgatories everlasting, I doubt not, muttered the small dark man, Tarascus. The yellow-haired man, Valerius, laughed harshly. What purgatory can be worse than life itself? So we are all damned together from birth. Besides, who would not sell his miserable soul for a throne? There's no intelligence in his stare, Orestes, said the large man. He has long been dead, answered Orestes. He is one newly awakened. His mind is empty after the long sleep. Nay, he was dead, not sleeping. We brought his spirit back over the voids and gulfs of night and oblivion. I will speak to him. He bent over the foot of the sarcophagus, and fixing his gaze on the wide, dark eyes of the man within, he said slowly, Awake, Zaltatun. The lips of the man moved mechanically. Zaltatun, he repeated in a groping whisper. You are Zaltatun, exclaimed Orestes, like a hypnotist driving home his suggestions. You are Zaltatun of Python and Acheron. A dim flame flickered in the dark eyes. I was Zaltatun, he whispered. I am dead. You are Zaltatun, cried Orestes. You are not dead. You live. I am Zaltatun, came the eerie whisper, but I am dead. In my house in Kimi, in Stygia, there I died. And the priests who poisoned you mummified your body with their dark arts, keeping all your organs intact, exclaimed Orestes. But now you live again. The heart of Ahriman has restored your life, drawn your spirit back from space and eternity. The heart of Ahriman? The flame of remembrance grew stronger. The barbarians stole it from me. He remembered, muttered Orestes. Lift him from the case. The others obeyed hesitantly, as if reluctant to touch the man they had recreated, and they seemed not easier in their minds when they felt firm, muscular flesh, vibrant with blood and life beneath their fingers. But they lifted him upon the table, and Orestes clothed him in a curious, dark velvet robe, splashed with gold stars and crescent moons, and fastened a cloth of gold fillet about his temples, confining the black wavy locks that fell to his shoulders. He let them do as they would, saying nothing, not even when they set him in a carven, throne-like chair, with a high ebony back and wide silver arms, and feet like golden claws. He sat there motionless, and slowly intelligence grew in his dark eyes, and made them deep and strange and luminous. It was as if long sunken witchlights floated slowly up through midnight pools of darkness. I mean, come on, that's a great sentence right there. Long sunken witchlights, midnight pools of darkness. It's just fun. Orestes cast a furtive glance at his companions, who stood staring in morbid fascination at their strange guest. Their iron nerves had withstood an ordeal that might have driven weaker men mad. He knew it was with no weaklings that he conspired, but men whose courage was as profound as their lawless ambitions and capacity for evil. He turned his attention to the figure in the ebon black chair, and this one spoke at last. I remember, he said, in a strong, resonant voice, speaking Nemedian with a curious, archaic accent. I am Zaltatun, who was high priest of Set in Python, which was in Acheron. The heart of Ahriman, I dreamed I had found it again. Where is it? Orestes placed it in his hand, and he drew breath deeply as he gazed into the depths of the terrible jewel burning in his grasp. They stole it from me, long ago, he said. The red heart of the night it is, strong to save or to damn. It came from afar and from long ago. While I held it, none could stand before me. But it was stolen from me, and Acheron fell, and I fled in exile into dark Stygia. Much I remember, but much I have forgotten. I have been in a far land, across misty voids and gulfs and unlit oceans. What is the year? Orestes answered him, It is the waning of the year of the lion, 3,000 years after the fall of Acheron. Sorry, I'm just going to pour a bit of tea. Probably should have done that before I started. 3,000 years, murmured the other. So long. Who are you? I am Orestes, once a priest of Mitra. This man is Almeric, baron of Tor and Numidia. The other is Tarascus, younger brother of the king of Numidia. And this tall man is Valerius, rightful heir of the throne of Aquilonia. Why have you given me life? Demanded Zaltatun. What do you require of me? The man was now fully alive and awake, his keen eyes reflecting the working of an unclouded brain. There was no hesitation or uncertainty in his manner. He came directly to the point, as one who knows that no man gives something for nothing. Orestes met him with equal candor. We have opened the doors of hell this night to free your soul and return it to your body, because we need your aid. We wish to place Tarascus on the throne of Numidia, and to win for Valerius the crown of Aquilonia. With your necromancy, you can aid us. Zaltatun's mind was devious and full of unexpected slants. You must be deep in the arts yourself, Orestes, to have been able to restore my life. How is it that a priest of Mitra knows of the heart of Ahriman and the incantations of Skelos? I am no longer a priest of Mitra, answered Orestes. I was cast forth from my order because of my delving in black magic. But for Almeric there, I might have been burned as a magician. But that left me free to pursue my studies. I journeyed in Zamora, in Vindaia, in Stygia, and among the haunted jungles of Kitai. I read the iron-bound books of Skelos, and talked with unseen creatures in deep wells, and faceless shapes in black, reeking jungles. I obtained a glimpse of your sarcophagus in the demon-haunted crypts below the black, giant-walled temple of Set in the hinterlands of Stygia, and I learned of the arts that would bring back life to your shriveled corpse. From moldering manuscripts I learned of the heart of Ahriman. Then, for a year I sought its hiding place, and at last I found it. Then why trouble to bring me back to life? Demanded Zaltatun, with his piercing gaze fixed on the priest. Why did you not employ the heart to further your own power? Because no man today knows the secrets of the heart, answered Orestes. Not even in legends live the arts by which to loose its full powers. I knew it could restore life. Of its deeper secrets, I am ignorant. I merely used it to bring you back to life. It is the use of your knowledge we seek. As for the heart, you alone know its awful secrets. Zaltatun shook his head, staring brutally into the flaming depths. My necromantic knowledge is greater than the sum of all the knowledge of other men, he said. Yet I do not know the full power of the jewel. I did not invoke it in the old days. I guarded it, lest it be used against me. At last it was stolen, and in the hands of a feathered shaman of the barbarians, it defeated all my mighty sorcery. Then it vanished, and I was poisoned by the jealous priests of Stygia before I could learn where it was hidden. It was hidden in a cavern below the temple of Mitra in Tarantia, said Orestes. By devious ways I discovered this, after I had located your remains in Set's subterranean temple in Stygia. Zamorian thieves, partly protected by spells I learned from sources better left unmentioned, stole your mummy case from under the very talons of those which guarded it in the dark, and by camel caravan and galley and ox wagon it came at last to this city. Those same thieves, or rather, those of them who still lived after their frightful quest, stole the heart of Ahriman from its haunted cavern below the temple of Mitra, and all the skill of men and the spells of sorcerers nearly failed. One man of them lived long enough to reach me and give the jewel into my hands, before he died slavering and gibbering of what he had seen in that accursed crypt. The thieves of Zamora are the most faithful of men to their trust. Even with my conjurements, none but they could have stolen the heart from where it was lain in demon-guarded darkness since the fall of Acheron 3,000 years ago. Zaltatun lifted his lion-like head and stared far off into space, as if plumbing the lost centuries. 3,000 years, he muttered. Set, tell me what has chanced in the world. The barbarians who overthrew Acheron set up new kingdoms, quoted Orestes. Where the empire had stretched, now rose realms called Aquilonia and Numidia and Argos from the tribes that founded them. The older kingdoms of Ophir, Corinthia, and western Koth, which had been subject to the kings of Acheron, regained their independence with the fall of the empire. And what are the people of Acheron? Demanded Zaltatun. When I fled into Stygia, Python was in ruins, and all the great purple-towered cities of Acheron fouled with blood and trampled by the sandals of the barbarians. In the hills, small groups of folk still boast descent from Acheron, answered Orestes. For the rest, the tide of my barbarian ancestors rolled over them and wiped them out. They, my ancestors, had suffered much from the kings of Acheron. A grim and terrible smile curled the Pythonian's lips. Aye, many a barbarian, both man and woman, died screaming on the altar under this hand. I have seen their heads piled to make a pyramid in the great square in Python, when the kings returned from the west with their spoils and naked captives. Aye, and when the day of reckoning came, the sword was not spared. So Acheron ceased to be, and purple-towered Python became a memory of forgotten days. But the younger kingdoms rose on the imperial ruins and waxed great. And now we have brought you back to aid us to rule these kingdoms, which, if less strange and wonderful than Acheron of old, are yet rich and powerful, well worth fighting for. Look! Orestes unrolled before the stranger a map drawn cunningly on vellum. Zaltatun regarded it, and then shook his head, baffled. The very outlines of the land are changed. It is like some familiar thing, seen in a dream, fantastically distorted. Howbeit, answered Orestes, tracing with his forefinger, here is Belverus, the capital of Numidia, in which we now are. Here run the boundaries of the land of Numidia. To the south and southeast are Ophir and Corinthia. To the east, Bithynia, to the west, Aquilonia. It is the map of a world I do not know, said Zaltatun softly. But Orestes did not miss the lurid fire of hate that flickered in his dark eyes. It is a map you shall help us change, answered Orestes. It is our desire first to set Tarascus on the throne of Numidia. We wish to accomplish this without strife, and in such a way that no suspicion will rest on Tarascus. We do not wish the land to be torn by civil wars, but to reserve all our power for the conquest of Aquilonia. Should King Nemed and his sons die naturally, in a plague for instance, Tarascus would mount the throne as the next heir, peacefully and unopposed. Zaltatun nodded, without replying, and Orestes continued. The other task will be more difficult. We cannot set Valerius on the Aquilonian throne without a war, and that kingdom is a formidable foe. Its people are a hardy, warlike race, toughened by continual wars with the Picts, Zingarians, and Cimmerians. For 500 years, Aquilonia and Numidia have intermittently waged war, and the ultimate advantage has always lain with the Aquilonians. Their present king is the most renowned warrior among the Western nations, He is an outlander, an adventurer who seized the crown by force during a time of civil strife, strangling King Numidides with his own hands upon the very throne. His name is Conan, and no man can stand before him in battle. Valerius is now the rightful heir of the throne. He had been driven into exile by his royal kinsman, Numidides, and had been away from his native realm for years. But he is of the blood of the old dynasty, and many of the barons would secretly hail the overthrow of Conan, who is a nobody without royal or even noble blood. But the common people are loyal to him, and the nobility of the outlying provinces. Yet, if his forces were overthrown in the battle that must first take place, and Conan himself slain, I think it would not be difficult to put Valerius on the throne. Indeed, with Conan slain, the only center of the government would be gone. He is not part of a dynasty, but only a lone adventurer. I do believe this guy made one of the classic blunders. Underestimating Conan. There's only two others. First, never get in a land war in Asia. Second, never go up against a Sicilian when death is on the line. But third, and perhaps more severe than those, is underestimating Conan. I wish that I might see this king, mused Zaltatun, glancing toward a silvery mirror which formed one of the panels of the wall. This mirror cast no reflection, but Zaltatun's expression showed that he understood its purpose, and Orestes nodded with the pride a good craftsman takes in the recognition of his accomplishments by a master of his craft. I have no shame in being a nerd. I am totally okay with that. I will try to show him to you, he said, and seating himself before the mirror, he gazed hypnotically into its depths, where presently a dim shadow began to take shape. It was uncanny, but those watching knew it was no more than the reflected image of Orestes' thought, embodied in that mirror, as a wizard's thoughts are embodied in a magic crystal. It floated hazily, then leaped into startling clarity. A tall man, mightily shouldered and deep of chest, with a massive corded neck and heavily muscled limbs. He was clad in silk and velvet, with the royal lions of Aquilonia worked in gold upon his rich jupon, and the crown of Aquilonia shone on his square-cut black mane. But the great sword at his side seemed more natural to him than the regal accoutrement. His brow was low and broad, his eyes a volcanic blue that smolders as if with some inner fire. His dark, scarred, almost sinister face was that of a fighting man, and his velvet garments could not conceal the hard, dangerous lines of his limbs. I don't think it was that kind of thoughts. That man is no Hyborian, exclaimed Zaltatun. No, he is a Cimmerian, one of those wild tribesmen who dwell in the gray hills of the north. I fought his ancestors of old, muttered Zaltatun. Not even the kings of Acheron could conquer them. They still remain a terror to the nations of the south, answered Orestes. He is a true son of that savage race, and has proven himself, thus far, unconquerable. Zaltatun did not reply. He sat staring down at the pool of living fire that shimmered in his hand. Outside, the hound howled again, long and shudderingly. Chapter 2. A Black Wind Blows. The year of the dragon had birth and war and pestilence and unrest. The black plague stalked through the streets of Belverus, striking down the merchant in his stall, the serf in his kennel, the knight at his banquet board. Before it, the arts of the leeches were helpless. Men said it had been sent from hell as punishment for the sins of pride and lust. It was swift and deadly as the stroke of an adder. The victim's body turned purple and then black, and within a few minutes he sank down dying, and the stench of his own putrefaction was in his nostrils even before death wrenched his soul from his rotting body. A hot, roaring wind blew incessantly from the south, and the crops withered in the fields. The cattle sank and died in their tracks. Men cried out on Mitra and muttered against the king, for somehow, throughout the kingdom, the word was whispered that the king was secretly addicted to loathsome practices and foul debauches in the seclusion of his nighted palace. And then, in that palace, death stalked grinning on feet about which swirled the monstrous vapors of the plague. In one night, the king died with his 3 sons, and the drums that thundered their dirge drowned the grim and ominous bells that rang from the carts that lumbered through the streets, gathering up the rotting dead. It may be ew, but it's still great description. That night, just before dawn, the hot wind that had blown for weeks ceased to rustle evilly through the silken window curtains. Out of the north, a great wind that roared among the towers rose, and there was cataclysmic thunder and blinding sheets of lightning and driving rain. But the dawn shone clean and green and clear. The scorched ground veiled itself in grass. The thirsty crops sprang up anew, and the plague was gone, its miasma swept clean out of the land by the mighty wind. Men said the gods were satisfied, because the evil king and his spawn were slain. And when his young brother Tarascus was crowned in the great coronation hall, the populace cheered until the towers rocked, acclaiming the monarch on whom the gods smiled. Such a wave of enthusiasm and rejoicing as swept the land is frequently the signal for a war of conquest. Does this count as ASMR? So no one was surprised when it was announced that King Tarascus had declared the truce made by the late king with their western neighbors void, and was gathering his hosts to invade Aquilonia. His reason was candid, his motives loudly proclaimed, gilded his actions with something of the glamour of a crusade. He espoused the cause of Valerius, rightful heir to the throne. He came, he proclaimed, not as an enemy of Aquilonia, but as a friend, to free the people from the tyranny of a usurper and a foreigner. If there were cynical smiles in certain quarters, and whispers concerning the king's good friend Almeric, whose vast personal wealth seemed to be flowing into the rather depleted royal treasury, they were unheeded in the general wave of fervor and zeal of Tarascus' popularity. If any shrewd individuals suspected that Almeric was the real ruler of Numidia behind the scenes, they were careful not to voice such heresy, and the war went forward with enthusiasm. Also glad to see you here, J-Math. The king and his allies moved westward at the head of 50,000 men, knights in shining armor with their pennons streaming above their heads, pikemen in steel caps and brigandines, crossbowmen in leather jerkins. They crossed the border, took a frontier castle, and burned 3 mountain villages. And then, in the valley of the Valkia, 10 miles west of the boundary line, they met the hosts of Conan, king of Aquilonia. 45,000 knights, archers, and men-at-arms, the flower of Aquilonian strength and chivalry. Only the knights of Poitin under Prospero had not yet arrived, for they had far to ride up from the southwestern corner of the kingdom. Tarascus had struck without warning. His invasion had come on the heels of his proclamation, without formal declaration of war. The two hosts confronted each other across a wide, shallow valley, with rugged cliffs and a shallow stream winding through the masses of reeds and willows down the middle of the vale. The camp followers of both hosts came down to this stream for water, and shouted insults and hurled stones across at one another. The last glints of the sun shone on the golden banner of Numidia, with the scarlet dragon unfurled in the breeze above the pavilion of King Tarascus, on an eminence near the eastern cliffs. But the shadow of the western cliffs fell like a vast purple pall across the tents and the army of Aquilonia, and upon the black banner with its golden lion that floated above King Conan's pavilion. All night the fires flared the length of the valley, and the wind brought the call of trumpets, the clangor of arms, and the sharp challenges of the sentries who paced their horses along either edge of the willow-grown stream. It was in the darkness before dawn that King Conan stirred on his couch, which was no more than a pile of silks and furs thrown on a dais, and awakened. He started up, crying out sharply and clutching at his sword. Palantides, his commander, rushing in at the cry, saw his king sitting upright, his hand on his hilt, and perspiration dripping from his strangely pale face. "Your Majesty!" exclaimed Palantides. "Is aught amiss?" "What of the camp?" demanded Conan. "Are the guards out?" 500 horsemen patrol the stream, Your Majesty," answered the general. "The Numidians have not offered to move against us in the night. They wait for dawn, even as we." "By Crom," muttered Conan, "I awoke with a feeling that doom was creeping on me in the night." He stared at the great golden lamp, which shed a soft glow over the velvet hangings and carpets of the great tent. They were alone. Not even a slave or page slept on the carpeted floor. But Conan's eyes blazed as they were wont to blaze, in the teeth of great peril, and the sword quivered in his hand. Palantides watched him uneasily. Conan seemed to be listening. "Listen," hissed the king. "Did you hear it? A furtive step." "7 knights guard your tent, Your Majesty," said Palantides. "None could approach it unchallenged." "Not outside," growled Conan. "It seemed to sound inside the tent." Palantides cast a swift, startled look around. The velvet hangings merged with shadows in the corners. But if there had been anyone in the pavilion besides themselves, the general would have seen him. Again he shook his head. "There's no one here, sire. You sleep in the midst of your host." "I have seen death strike a king in the midst of thousands," muttered Conan. "Something that walks on invisible feet and is not seen." "Perhaps you were dreaming, Your Majesty," said Palantides, somewhat perturbed. "So I was," grunted Conan. "A devilish dream it was, too. I trod again all the long, weary roads I traveled on my way to the kingship." He fell silent, and Palantides stared at him unspeaking. The king was an enigma to the general, as to most of his civilized subjects. Palantides knew that Conan had walked many strange roads in his wild, eventful life, and had been many things before a twist of fate set him on the throne of Aquilonia. "I saw again the battlefield whereon I was born," said Conan, resting his chin moodily on a massive fist. "I saw myself in a panther-skin loincloth, throwing my spear at the mountain beasts. I was a mercenary swordsman again, a hetman of the Kozakai who dwell upon the Zaporoska River, a corsair looting the coasts of Kush, a pirate of the Barachan Isles, a chief of the Himalayan hillmen. All these things I've been, and of all these things I dreamed. All the shapes that I have been passed like an endless procession, and their feet beat out a dirge in the sounding dust. But throughout my dreams moved strange veiled figures and ghostly shadows, and a faraway voice mocked me. And toward the last I seemed to see myself lying on this dais in my tent, and a shape bent over me, robed and hooded. I lay unable to move, and then the hood fell away, and a moldering skull grinned down at me. Then it was that I awoke. "This is an evil dream, Your Majesty," said Palantides, suppressing a shudder, "but no more." Conan shook his head, more in doubt than in denial. He came of a barbarian race, and the superstitions and instincts of his heritage lurked close beneath the surface of his consciousness. "I've dreamed many evil dreams," he said, "and most of them were meaningless. But by Crom, this was not like most dreams. I wish this battle were fought and won, for I have had a grisly premonition ever since King Nimed died in the Black Plague. Why did it cease when he died?" "Men say he sinned." "Men are fools, as always," grunted Conan. "If the plague struck all who sinned, then by Crom there wouldn't be enough left to count the living. Why should the gods, who the priests tell me are just, slay 500 peasants and merchants and nobles before they slew the king, if the whole pestilence were aimed at him? Were the gods smiting blindly like swordsmen in a fog? By Mitra, if I aimed my strokes no straighter, Aquilonia would have had a new king long ago. No, the Black Plague's no common pestilence. It lurks in Stygian tombs, and is called forth into being only by wizards. I was a swordsman in Prince Almeric's army that invaded Stygia, and of his 30,000, 15,000 perished by Stygian arrows, and the rest by the Black Plague that rolled on us like a wind out of the south. I was the only man who lived. Yet only 500 died in Numidia, argued Palantides. Whoever called it into being also knew how to cut it short at will, answered Conan. So I know there was something planned and diabolical about it. Someone called it forth. Someone banished it when the work was completed, when Tarascus was safe on the throne and being hailed as the deliverer of the people from the wrath of the gods. By Crom, I sense a black, subtle brain behind all this. What of this stranger who men say gives counsel to Tarascus? He wears a veil, answered Palantides. They say he is a foreigner, a stranger from Stygia. A stranger from Stygia, repeated Conan, scowling. A stranger from hell, more like. Ha! What is that? The trumpets of the Numidians, exclaimed Palantides. And hark! How our own blare upon their heels. Dawn is breaking, and the captains are marshalling the hosts for the onset. Mitra be with them, for many will not see the sun go down behind the crags. Send my squires to me, exclaimed Conan, rising with alacrity, and casting off his velvet night garment. He seemed to have forgotten his forebodings at the prospect of action. Go to the captains, and see that all is in readiness. I will be with you as soon as I don my armor. Many of Conan's ways were inexplicable to the civilized people he ruled, and one of them was his insistence on sleeping alone in his chamber or tent. Palantides hastened from the pavilion, clinking in the armor he had donned at midnight after a few hours' sleep. He cast a swift glance over the camp, which was beginning to swarm with activity, mail clinking and men moving about dimly in the uncertain light, among the long lines of tents. Stars still glimmered palely in the western sky, but long pink streamers stretched across the eastern horizon, and against them the dragon banner of Numidia flung out its billowing silken folds. Palantides turned toward a smaller tent nearby, where slept the royal squires. These were tumbling out already, roused by the trumpets. And as Palantides called to them to hasten, he was frozen speechless by a deep, fierce shout and the impact of a heavy blow inside the king's tent, followed by the heart-stopping crash of a falling body. There sounded a low laugh that churned the general's blood to ice. Echoing the cry, Palantides wheeled and rushed back into the pavilion. He cried out again as he saw Conan's powerful frame stretched out on the carpet. The king's great two-handed sword lay near his hand, and a shattered tent pole seemed to show where his stroke had fallen. Palantides' sword was out, and he glared about the tent, but nothing met his gaze. Save for the king and himself, it was empty, as it had been when he left. "Your Majesty!" Palantides threw himself on his knees beside the fallen giant. Conan's eyes were open. They blazed up at him with full intelligence and recognition. His lips writhed, but no sound came forth. He seemed unable to move. Voices sounded without. Palantides rose swiftly and stepped to the door. The royal squires and one of the knights who guarded the tent stood there. "We heard a sound within," said the knight apologetically. Is all well with the king?" Palantides regarded him searchingly. "None has entered or left the pavilion this night?" "None save yourself, my lord," answered the knight, and Palantides could not doubt his honesty. "The king stumbled and dropped his sword," said Palantides briefly. "Return to your post." As the knight turned away, the general covertly motioned to the 5 royal squires, and when they had followed him, When they had followed him in, he drew the flap closely. They turned pale at the sight of the king stretched upon the carpet, but Palantides' quick gesture checked their exclamations. The general bent over him again, and again Conan made an effort to speak. The veins in his temples and the cords in his neck swelled with his efforts, and he lifted his head clear of the ground. Voice came at last, mumbling and half intelligible. The thing in the corner. Palantides lifted his head and looked fearfully about him. He saw the pale faces of the squires in the lamplight, the velvet shadows that lurked along the walls of the pavilion. That was all. "There's nothing here, your majesty," he said. "It was there, in the corner," muttered the king, tossing his lion-maned head from side to side, his efforts to rise. It's been a while since I heard that song. A man, at least he looked like a man, wrapped in rags like a mummy's bandages, with a moldering cloak drawn about him, and a hood. All I could see was his eyes as he crouched there in the shadows. I thought he was a shadow himself, until I saw his eyes. They were like black jewels. I made at him and swung my sword, but I missed him clean, how Crom knows, and splintered that pole instead. He caught my wrist as I staggered off balance, and his fingers burned like hot iron. All the strength went out of me, and the floor rose and struck me like a club. Then he was gone, and I was down, and, curse him, I can't move. I'm paralyzed. Palantides lifted the giant's hand, and his flesh crawled. On the king's wrist showed the blue marks of long, lean fingers. What hand could grip so hard as to leave his print on that thick wrist? Palantides remembered that low laugh he had heard as he rushed into the tent, and cold perspiration beaded his skin. It had not been Conan who laughed. "This is a thing diabolical," whispered a trembling squire. "Men say the children of darkness war for Tarascus." "Be silent," ordered Palantides sternly. Outside, the dawn was dimming the stars. A light wind sprang up from the peaks and brought the fanfare of 1,000 trumpets. At the sound, a convulsive shudder ran through the king's mighty form. Again, the veins in his temples knotted as he strove to break the invisible shackles which crushed him down. "Put my harness on me and tie me into my saddle," he whispered. "I'll lead the charge yet." Palantides shook his head, and a squire plucked his skirt. "My lord, we are lost if the host learns the king has been smitten. Only he could have led us to victory this day." "Help me lift him on the dais," answered the general. They obeyed, and laid the helpless giant on the furs, and spread a silken cloak over him. Palantides turned to the 5 squires, and searched their pale faces long before he spoke. "Our lips must be sealed forever as to what happens in this tent," he said at last. "The kingdom of Aquilonia depends upon it. One of you, go and fetch me the officer Valanus, who is a captain of the Pelian spearmen." The squire indicated bowed and hastened from the tent, and Palantides stood staring down at the stricken king, while outside trumpets blared, drums thundered, and the roar of multitudes rose in the growing dawn. Presently, the squire returned with the officer Palantides had named, a tall man, broad and powerful, built much like the king. Like him also he had thick black hair, but his eyes were gray, and he did not resemble Conan in his features. "The king is stricken by a strange malady," said Palantides briefly. "A great honor is yours. You are to wear his armor and ride at the head of the host today. None must know that it is not the king who rides." It is an honor for which a man might gladly give up his life," stammered the captain, overcome by the suggestion. "Mitre grant that I do not fail of this mighty trust." And while the fallen king stared with burning eyes that reflected the bitter rage and humiliation that ate his heart, the squires stripped Valanus of mail shirt, burgonet, and leg pieces, and clad him in Conan's armor of black plate mail, with the visored salade and the dark plumes nodding over the wyvern crest. Over all they put the silken surcoat, with the royal lion worked in gold upon the breast, and they girt him with a broad, gold-buckled belt, which supported a jewel-hilted broadsword in a cloth of gold scabbard. While they worked, trumpets clamored outside, arms clanged, and across the river rose a deep-throated roar as squadron after squadron swung into place. Full armed, Volanus dropped to his knee and bent his plumes before the figure that lay on the dais. Lord King, Mitra grant that I do not dishonor the harness I wear this day. Bring me Tarasca's head, and I'll make you a baron. In the stress of his anguish, Conan's veneer of civilization had fallen from him. His eyes flamed. He ground his teeth in fury and bloodlust, as barbaric as any tribesman in the Cimmerian hills. All right, we're going to take a short intermission there. What do you guys think so far? You enjoying this one as much as the people of the Black Circle? Crickets. Well, hopefully that's because y'all are taking a quick break and not because you hate the story. Okay. I do like a good descriptive sentence that I can really like sink my teeth into. It's a lot of fun. I wasn't trying to rush you, Vela. Maybe you're the one who needs the mug warmer for your coffee. I do appreciate how often you're here. The support is amazing. It really does mean a lot to me. About your support? No, not in the least. I mean that sincerely. It really is awesome. I've been enjoying doing this with all of you. It's nice to sit and read. I used to read every night to my kid, but I made a point of it. No matter what I was doing, I'd stop whatever it was and go and read to her. But she kind of grew out of it, and it feels like, I don't know, last couple years it feels like we've been growing apart a bit, which I suppose her becoming a teenager, that's fairly natural, but still makes me sad. I don't know. Hopefully she doesn't drift too far away. Oh yeah, little dude's here? Alright, right on. How you doing, little dude? Oh, okay. Gonna let him listen to the recording? Awesome. Well, little dude, when you listen to this, I'm glad you're enjoying the readings. Awesome. And it seems to be where most of the viewer numbers come from, is people rewatching the recordings, or listening to them, I suppose would be a more accurate way to describe it. So this is better than flying him around Dragonback? It's been a year or two since we did that, didn't it? Hasn't it? I was playing, I used to play Ark, and Vela's son came onto the server we were on, and I came by to, I think I was bringing her something, and I had my wyvern, and I mean, it looked like a dragon more or less, but I landed and he was just bowled over. He thought it was the coolest thing. So I had him climb up on the back of it and lay down flat so he wouldn't fall off. And then we flew all around the island. That was the map for Ark. It was this... Ark was weird. So it was this volcanic island covered in dinosaurs that was actually a sort of space station floating in orbit around a ruined Earth, but somehow is also like a simulation. So everything was kind of digital. So, I don't know. It was like they just put a whole bunch of different genres and concepts in a blender, pushed the button and said, okay, whatever comes out is great. Somehow it worked though, because, man, I put way too many hours into that game. Way too many hours into that game. Do not try that game if you've not played it. It will suck your life away. That, and it's become a bit too toxic, really. It's also heartbreaking. You put in so much effort and build and raise dinos and all that, and then while you're asleep, somebody comes along and kills everything you had. And it's just all gone, and you log in the next morning and everything that you've been building for weeks is just in ruins. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. But I think that's given everybody enough time. So let's get back into that story. See how far we can get. Okay. Worried for a second there because the camera's all out of focus. There we go. All right. Chapter 3. And this is probably going to be a multi-session one. It's we're only 9% in, so I have a feeling we'll be reading this for a bit. This is more of a novel-length Conan story than the Black Circle was. Yeah. Chapter 3. The Cliffs Reel. The Aquilonian host was drawn up, long serried lines of pikemen and horsemen in gleaming steel, when a giant figure in black armor emerged from the royal pavilion. And as he swung up into the saddle of the black stallion held by 4 squires, a roar that shook the mountains went up from the host. They shook their blades and thundered forth their acclaim of their warrior king. Knights in gold-chased armor, pikemen in mail coats and bassinets, archers in their leather jerkins, with their longbows in their left hands. The host on the opposite side of the valley was in motion, trotting down the long, gentle slope toward the river. Their steel shone through the mists of morning that swirled about their horses' feet. The Aquilonian host moved leisurely to meet them. The measured tramp of the armored horses made the ground tremble. Banners flung out long silken folds in the morning wind. Lances swayed like a bristling forest, dipped and sank, their pennons fluttering about them. 10 men-at-arms, grim, taciturn veterans who could hold their tongues, guarded the royal pavilion. One squire stood in the tent, peering out through a slit in the doorway. But for the handful in the secret, no one else in the vast host knew that it was not Conan who rode on the great stallion at the head of the army. The Aquilonian host had assumed the customary formation. The strongest part was the center, composed entirely of heavily armored knights. The wings were made up of smaller bodies of horsemen, mounted men-at-arms mostly, supported by pikemen and archers. The latter were Bosonians from the western marches, strongly built men of medium stature, in leathern jackets and iron headpieces. The Numidian army came on in similar formation, and the two hosts moved toward the center, the wings in advance of the centers. In the center of the Aquilonian host, the great lion banner streamed its billowing black folds over the steel-clad figure on the black stallion. But on his dais in the royal pavilion, Conan groaned in anguish of spirit and cursed with strange, heathen oaths. The hosts moved together, quoth the squire, watching from the door. Hear the trumpets peal. Ha! The rising sun strikes fire from lance heads and helmets until I am dazzled. It turns the river crimson. Aye, it will truly be crimson before this day is done. The foe have reached the river. Now arrows fly between the hosts like stinging clouds that hide the sun. Ha! Well loosed, bowmen. The Bosonians have the better of it. Hark to them shout. It's like he's an announcer calling a football match. Faintly in the eyes of the king, above the din of trumpets and clanging steel, came the deep, fierce shout of the Bosonians as they drew and loosed in perfect unison. Their archers seek to hold ours in play, while their knights ride into the river, said the squire. The banks are not steep. They slope to the water's edge. The knights come on. They crash through the willows. By Mitra, the cloth-yard shafts find every crevice in their harness. Horses and men go down, struggling and thrashing in the water. It is not deep, nor is the current swift, but men are drowning there, dragged under by their armor and trampled by the frantic horses. Now the knights of Aquilonia advance. They ride into the water and engage the knights of Numidia. The water swirls about their horses' bellies, and the clang of sword against sword is deafening. Crom! Burst in agony from Conan's lips. Life was coursing sluggishly back into his veins, but still he could not lift his mighty frame from the dais. The wings close in, said the squire. Pikemen and swordsmen fight hand to hand in the stream, and behind them the bowmen ply their shafts. By Mitra, the Numidian arbalesters are sorely harried, and the Bosonians arch their arrows to drop amid the rear ranks. Their center gains not a foot, and their wings are pushed back up from the stream again. Crom, Mimir, and Mitra, raged Conan. Gods and devils, could I but reach the fighting, if but to die at the first blow. Outside, through the long, hot day, the battle stormed and thundered. The valley shook to charge and countercharge, to the whistling of shafts and the crash of rending shields and splintering lances. But the hosts of Aquilonia held fast. Once they were forced back from the bank, but a countercharge with the black banner flowing over the black stallion regained the lost ground. And like an iron rampart, they held the right bank of the stream, and at last the squire gave Conan the news that the Numidians were falling back from the river. Their wings are in confusion, he cried. Their knights reel back from the swordplay. But what is this? Your banner is in motion. The center sweeps into the stream. By Mitra, Valanis is leading the host across the river. Fool, groaned Conan. It may be a trick. He should hold his position. By dawn Prospero will be here with the Poetanian levies. The knights ride into a hail of arrows, cried the squire. But they do not falter. They sweep on. They have crossed. They charge up the slope. Palantides has hurled the wings across the river to their support. It is all he can do. The lion banner dips and staggers above the melee. The knights of Numidia make a stand. They are broken. They fall back. Their left wing is in full flight, and our pikemen cut them down as they run. I see Valanus riding and smiting like a madman. He is carried beyond himself by the fighting lust. Men no longer look to Palantides. They follow Valanus, deeming him Conan as he rides with closed visor. But look, there is method in his madness. He swings wide at the Numidian front, with 5,000 knights, the pick of the army. The main host of the Numidians is in confusion. And look, their flank is protected by the cliffs, but there is a defile left unguarded. It is like a great cleft in the wall that opens again behind the Numidian lines. By Mitra, Valanus sees and seizes the opportunity. He has driven their wing before him, and he leads his knights toward that defile. They swing wide of the main battle. They cut through a line of spearmen. They charge into the defile. "An ambush!" cried Conan, striving to struggle upright. "No!" shouted the squire exultantly. "The whole Numidian host is in full sight. They have forgotten the defile. They never expected to be pushed back that far. Oh, fool, fool Tarascus to make such a blunder. Ah, I see lances and pennons pouring from the farther mouth of the defile, beyond the Numidian lines. They will smite those ranks from the rear and crumple them. Mitra, what is this?" He staggered as the walls of the tent swayed drunkenly. Afar, over the thunder of the fight, rose a deep, bellowing roar, indescribably ominous. "The cliffs reel!" shrieked the squire. "Oh, gods, what is this? The river foams out of its channel, and the peaks are crumbling. The ground shakes, and horses and riders in armor are overthrown. The cliffs are falling!" With his words, there came a grinding rumble and a thunderous concussion, and the ground trembled. Over the roar of the battle sounded screams of mad terror. "The cliffs have crumbled!" cried the livid squire. "They have thundered down into the defile and crushed every living creature in it. I saw the lion banner wave an instant amid the dust and falling stones, and then it vanished. Ah, the Numidians shout with triumph. Well may they shout, for the fall of the cliffs has wiped out 5,000 of our bravest knights. Hark!" To Conan's ears came a vast torrent of sound, rising and rising in frenzy. "The king is dead! The king is dead! Flee! Flee! The king is dead!" "Liars!" panted Conan. "Dogs! Knaves! Cowards! Oh, Crom, if I could but stand, but crawl to the river with my sword in my teeth! How, boy, do they flee?" "Aye," sobbed the squire. "They spur for the river. They are broken, hurled on like spume before a storm. I see Palantides striving to stem the torrent. He is down, and the horses trample him. They rush into the river, knights, bowmen, pikemen, all mixed and mingled in one mad torrent of destruction. The Numidians are on their heels, cutting them down like corn." "But they will make a stand on this side of the river," cried the king. With an effort that brought the sweat dripping from his temples, he heaved himself up on his elbows. "Nay," cried the squire, "they cannot. They are broken, routed. Oh, gods, that I should live to see this day." Then he remembered his duty and shouted to the men-at-arms who stood stolidly, watching the flight of their comrades. "Get a horse, swiftly, and help me lift the king upon it. We dare not bide here." But before they could do his bidding, the first drift of the storm was upon them. Knights and spearmen and archers fled among the tents, stumbling over ropes and baggage, and mingled with them were Numidian riders, who smote right and left at all alien figures. Tent ropes were cut, fires sprang up in 100 places, and the plundering had already begun. The grim guardsmen about Conan's tent died where they stood, smiting and thrusting, and over their mangled corpses beat the hooves of their conquerors. But the squire had drawn the flap close, and in the confused madness of the slaughter, none realized that the pavilion held an occupant. So the flight and the pursuit swept past, and roared away up the valley, and the squire looked out presently to see a cluster of men approaching the royal tent with evident purpose. "Here comes the king of Numidia with 4 companions and his squire," quoth he. "He will accept your surrender, my fair lord." "Surrender the devil's heart," gritted the king. He had forced himself up to a sitting posture. He swung his legs painfully off the dais and staggered upright, reeling drunkenly. The squire ran to assist him, but Conan pushed him away. "Give me that bow," he gritted, indicating a longbow and quiver that hung from the tent pole. "But your majesty," cried the squire in great perturbation, "the battle is lost. It were the part of majesty to yield with a dignity becoming one of royal blood." "I have no royal blood," ground Conan. "I am a barbarian and the son of a blacksmith." Wrenching away the bow and an arrow, he staggered toward the opening of the pavilion. So formidable was his appearance, naked but for short leather breeks and sleeveless shirt, open to reveal his great hairy chest, with his huge limbs and his blue eyes blazing under his tangled black mane, that the squire shrank back, more afraid of his king than of the whole Numidian host. Reeling on wide-braced legs, Conan drunkenly tore the door flap open and staggered out under the canopy. The king of Numidia and his companions had dismounted, and they halted short, staring in wonder at the apparition confronting them. "Here I am, you jackals," roared the Cimmerian. "I am the king. Death to you, dog brothers." He jerked the arrow to its head and loosed, and the shaft feathered itself at the breast of the knight who stood by Tarascus. Conan hurled the bow at the king of Numidia. "Curse my shaky hand. Come in and take me if you dare." Reeling backward on unsteady legs, he fell with his shoulders against a tent pole, and propped upright, he lifted his great sword with both hands. "By Mitra, it is the king," swore Tarascus. He cast a swift look about him and laughed. That other was a jackal in his harness. "In, dogs, and take his head." The 3 soldiers, men-at-arms wearing the emblem of the royal guards, rushed at the king, and one felled the squire with a blow of a mace. The other 2 fared less well. As the first rushed in, lifting his sword, Conan met him with a sweeping stroke that severed mail links like cloth and sheared the Numidian's arm and shoulder clean from his body. His corpse, pitching backwards, fell across his companion's legs. The man stumbled, and before he could recover, the great sword was through him. Conan wrenched out his steel with a racking gasp and staggered back against the tent pole. His great limbs trembled, his chest heaved, and sweat poured down his face and neck. But his eyes flamed with exultant savagery, and he panted, "Why do you stand afar off, dog of Belverus? I can't reach you. Come in and die." Tarascus hesitated, glanced at the remaining man-at-arms and his squire, a gaunt, saturnine man in black mail, and took a step forward. He was far inferior in size and strength to the giant Cimmerian, but he was in full armor and was famed in all the western nations as a swordsman. But his squire caught his arm. "Nay, your majesty, do not throw away your life. I will summon archers to shoot this barbarian as we shoot lions." Neither of them had noticed that a chariot had approached while the fight was going on, and now came to a halt before them. But Conan saw, looking over their shoulders, and a queer, chill sensation crawled along his spine. There was something vaguely unnatural about the appearance of the black horses that drew the vehicle, but it was the occupant of the chariot that arrested the king's attention. He was a tall man, superbly built, clad in a long, unadorned silk robe. He wore a Shemitish headdress, and its lower folds hid his features, except for the dark, magnetic eyes. The hands that grasped the reins, pulling the rearing horses back on their haunches, were white but strong. Conan glared at the stranger, all his primitive instincts roused. He sensed an aura of menace and power that exuded from this veiled figure, a menace as definite as the windless waving of tall grass that marks the path of a serpent. "Hail, Zaltatun!" exclaimed Tarascus. "Here is the king of Aquilonia. He did not die in the landslide, as we thought." "I know," answered the other, without bothering to say how he knew. "What is your present intention?" "I will summon the archers to slay him," answered the Numidian. "As long as he lives, he will be dangerous to us." "Yet even a dog has uses," answered Zaltatun. "Take him alive." Conan laughed raspingly. "Come in and try," he challenged. "But for my treacherous legs, I'd hew you out from that chariot like a woodman hewing a tree. But you'll never take me alive, damn you." "He speaks the truth, I fear," said Tarascus. "The man is a barbarian, with the senseless ferocity of a wounded tiger. Let me summon the archers." "Watch me, and learn wisdom," advised Zaltatun. His hand dipped into his robe, and came out with something shining, a glistening sphere. This he threw suddenly at Conan. "It's a Pokeball." Sorry, couldn't help myself. The Cimmerian contemptuously struck it aside with his sword. At the instant of contact, there was a sharp explosion, a flare of white, blinding flame, and Conan pitched senseless to the ground. "He is dead?" Tarascus' tone was more assertion than inquiry. "No, he is but senseless. He will recover his senses in a few hours. Benjamin bind his arms and legs and lift him into my chariot." With a gesture, Tarascus did so, and they heaved the senseless king into the chariot, grunting with their burden. Zaltatun threw a velvet cloak over his body, completely covering him from any who might peer in. He gathered the reins in his hands. "I'm for Belverus," he said. "Tell Almeric that I will be with him if he needs me." But with Conan out of the way, and his army broken, lance and sword should suffice for the rest of the conquest. Prospero cannot be bringing more than 10,000 men to the field, and will doubtless fall back to Tarantia when he hears the news of the battle. Say nothing to Almeric of Valerius, or anyone about our capture. Let them think Conan died in the fall of the cliffs. I mean, he's a wizard. What do you expect? He looked at the man-at-arms for a long space, until the guardsman moved restlessly, nervous under the scrutiny. "What is that about your waist?" Zaltatun demanded. "Why, my girdle, may it please you, my lord," stuttered the amazed guardsman. "You lie!" Zaltatun's laugh was as merciless as a sword edge. "It is a poisonous serpent. What a fool you are to wear a reptile about your waist." With distended eyes, the man looked down, and to his utter horror, he saw that the buckle of his girdle rear up at him. It was a snake's head. He saw the evil eyes and the dripping fangs, heard the hiss, and felt the loathsome contact of the thing about his body. He screamed hideously and struck at it with his naked hand, felt its fangs flesh themselves in that hand, and then he stiffened and fell heavily. I mean, that's a great way to describe it, really. Instead of the snake bit him or sunk its fangs, they fleshed themselves in his hand. And then he stiffened and fell heavily. Tarascus looked down at him without expression. He saw only the leathern girdle and the buckle, the pointed tongue of which was stuck in the guardsman's palm. Zaltatun turned his hypnotic gaze on Tarascus' squire, and the man turned ashen and began to tremble. But the king interposed. "Nay, we can trust him." The sorcerer tautened the reins and swung the horses around. "See that this piece of work remains secret. If I am needed, let Altero, Orestes' servant, summon me as I have taught him. I will be in your palace at Belverus." Tarascus lifted his hand in salutation, but his expression was not pleasant to see as he looked after the departing mesmerist. "Why should he spare the Cimmerian?" whispered the frightened squire. "That I am wondering myself," grunted Tarascus. Behind the rumbling chariot, the dull roar of battle and pursuit faded in the distance. The setting sun rimmed the cliffs with scarlet flame, and the chariot moved into the vast blue shadows floating up out of the east. Chapter 4. From what hell have you crawled? Of that long ride in the chariot of Zaltatun, Conan knew nothing. He lay like a dead man while the bronze wheels clashed over the stones of mountain roads and swished through the deep grass of fertile valleys, and finally, dropping down from the rugged heights, rumbled rhythmically along the broad white road that winds through the rich meadowlands to the walls of Belverus. Just before dawn, some faint reviving of life touched him. He heard a mumble of voices, the groan of ponderous hinges. Through a slit in the cloak that covered him, he saw, faintly in the lurid glare of torches, the great black arch of a gateway, and the bearded faces of men-at-arms, the torches striking fire from their spearheads and helmets. "How went the battle, my fair lord?" spoke an eager voice in the Numidian tongue. "Well indeed," was the curt reply. "The king of Aquilonia lies slain, and his host is broken." A babble of excited voices rose, drowned the next instant by the whirling wheels of the chariot on the flags. Sparks flashed from under the revolving rims as Zaltatun lashed his steeds through the arch. But Conan heard one of the guardsmen mutter, "From beyond the border to Belverus between sunset and dawn, and the horses scarcely sweating. By Mitra they—" Then silence drank the voices, and there was only the clatter of hooves and wheels along the shadowy street. What he had heard registered itself on Conan's brain, but suggested nothing to him. He was like a mindless automaton that hears and sees, but does not understand. Sights and sounds flowed meaninglessly about him. He lapsed again into a deep lethargy, and was only dimly aware when the chariot halted in a deep, high-walled court, and he was lifted from it by many hands and borne up a winding stone stair and down a long, dim corridor. Whispers, stealthy footsteps, unrelated sounds surged or rustled about him, irrelevant and far away. Yet his ultimate awakening was abrupt and crystal clear. He possessed full knowledge of the battle in the mountains and its sequences, and he had a good idea of where he was. He lay on a velvet couch, clad as he was the day before, but with his limbs loaded with chains not even he could break. The room in which he lay was furnished with somber magnificence, the walls covered with black velvet tapestries, the floor with heavy purple carpets. There was no sign of door or window, and one curiously carven golden lamp, swinging from the fretted ceiling, shed a lurid light over all. In that light, the figure seated in a silver, throne-like chair before him seemed unreal and fantastic, with an elusiveness of outline that was heightened by a filmy silken robe. But the features were distinct, unnaturally so in that uncertain light. It was almost as if a weird nimbus played about the man's head, casting the bearded face into bold relief, so that it was the only definite and distinct reality in that mystic, ghostly chamber. It was a magnificent face, with strongly chiseled features of classical beauty. There was, indeed, something disquieting about the calm tranquility of his aspect, a suggestion of more than human knowledge, of a profound certitude beyond human assurance. Also, an uneasy sensation of familiarity twitched at the back of Conan's consciousness. He had never seen this man's face before, he well knew, yet those features reminded him of something or someone. It was like encountering in the flesh some dream image that had haunted one in nightmares. "Who are you?" demanded the king belligerently, struggling to a sitting position in spite of his chains. "Men call me Zaltatun," was the reply, in a strong, golden voice. "What place is this?" the Cimmerian next demanded. "A chamber in the palace of King Tarascus, in Belverus." Conan was not surprised. Belverus, the capital, was at the same time the largest Numidian city so near the border. "And where's Tarascus?" "With the army." Well, growled Conan, if you mean to murder me, why don't you do it and get it over with? I did not save you from the king's archers to murder you in Belverus, answered Zaltatoon. What the devil did you do to me? Demanded Conan. I blasted your consciousness, answered Zaltatoon. How? You would not understand. Call it black magic, if you will. Conan had already reached that conclusion and was mulling over something else. I think I understand why you spared my life, he rumbled. Almeric wants to keep me as a check on Valerius, in case the impossible happens and he becomes king of Aquilonia. It's well known that the Baron of Tor is behind this move to seat Valerius on my throne, and if I know Almeric, he doesn't intend that Valerius should be anything more than a figurehead, as Tarascus is now. Almeric knows nothing of your capture, answered Zaltatoon. Neither does Valerius. Both think you died at Valkia. Conan's eyes narrowed as he stared at the man in silence. I sensed a brain behind all this, he muttered, but I thought it was Almeric's. Are Almeric, Tarascus, and Valerius all but puppets dancing on your string? Who are you? What does it matter? If I told you, you would not believe me. What if I told you I might set you back on the throne of Aquilonia? Conan's eyes burned on him like a wolf. What's your price? Obedience to me. Go to hell with your offer, snarled Conan. I'm no figurehead. I won my crown with my sword. Besides, it's beyond your power to buy and sell the throne of Aquilonia at your will. The kingdom's not conquered. One battle doesn't decide a war. You war against more than swords, answered Zaltatoon. Was it a mortal sword that felled you in your tent before the fight? Nay, it was a child of the dark, a waif of outer space, whose fingers were afire with the frozen coldness of the black gulfs, which froze the blood in your veins and the marrow of your thews. Coldness so cold it burned your flesh like white, hot iron. Was it chance that led the man who wore your harness to lead his knights into the defile? Chance that brought the cliffs crashing down upon them? Conan glared at him unspeaking, feeling a chill along his spine. Wizards and sorcerers abounded in his barbaric mythology, and any fool could tell that this was no common man. Conan sensed an inexplicable something about him that set him apart, an alien aura of time and space, a sense of tremendous and sinister antiquity, but his stubborn spirit refused to flinch. The fall of the cliffs was chance, he muttered truculently. The charge into the defile was what any man would have done. Not so. You would not have led a charge into it. You would have suspected a trap. You would never have crossed the river in the first place, unless you were sure the Numidian route was real. Hypnotic suggestions would not have invaded your mind, even in the madness of battle, to make you mad and rush blindly into the trap laid for you, as it did the lesser man who masqueraded as you. Then if this was all planned, Conan grunted skeptically, all a plot to trap my host, why did not the child of darkness kill me in my tent? Because I wished to take you alive. It took no wizardry to predict that Palantides would send another man out in your harness. I wanted you alive and unhurt. You may fit into my scheme of things. There is a vital power about you greater than the craft and cunning of my allies. You are a bad enemy, but might make a fine vassal. If you will only embrace the power of the dark side, my young apprentice. Dude's looking for his Vader. Conan spat savagely at the word, and Zaltatoon, ignoring his fury, took a crystal globe from a nearby table and placed it before him. He did not support it in any way, nor place it on anything, but it hung motionless in midair, as solidly as if it rested on an iron pedestal. Conan snorted at this bit of necromancy, but he was nevertheless impressed. Of course the dark side has cookies. The cookies might have poison in them, and they might kill you, but they have cookies. Speaking of cookies, I want cookies. I think might need to make some cookies. Or, more accurately, beg and plead with my best friend to bake some cookies. My baking is a disaster. There are a small few things that I am what I call aggressively terrible at. Baking, gardening, and graphical software. Although I'm going to try very hard to correct that last one. But yeah. No, Fella's right. When I try to bake, cookies come out half raw and half charcoal, and I don't know how. Even if I'm supervised, even if I follow the directions, even if they're that pre-made kind that you can just like pick apart, put on a sheet, and throw in the oven. Somehow, some way, if I'm involved, it all goes to hell. Would you know of what goes on in Aquilonia? He asked. Conan did not reply, but the sudden rigidity of his form betrayed his interest. Zaltatun stared into the cloudy depths and spoke. It is now the evening of the day after the Battle of Valkia. Last night, the main body of the army camped by Valkia, while squadrons of knights harried the fleeing Aquilonians. At dawn, the host broke camp and pushed westward through the mountains. Prospero, with 10,000 Poetanians, was miles from the battlefield when he met the fleeing survivors in the early dawn. He had pushed on all night, hoping to reach the field before the battle joined. Unable to rally the remnants of the broken host, he fell back toward Tarantia. Riding hard, replacing his wearied horses with steeds seized from the countryside, he approaches Tarantia. I see his weary knights, their armor gray with dust, their pennons drooping as they push their tired horses through the plain. I see also the streets of Tarantia. The city is in turmoil. Somehow, word has reached the people of the defeat and the death of King Conan. The mob is mad with fear, crying out that the king is dead and there is none to lead them against the Numidians. Giant shadows rush on Aquilonia from the east, and the sky is black with vultures. What are these but words? The raggedest beggar in the street might prophesy as much. If you say you saw all that in the glass ball, then you're a liar as well as a knave, of which last there's no doubt. Prospero will hold Tarantia, and the barons will rally to him. Count Trocero of Poitin commands the kingdom in my absence, and he'll drive these Numidian dogs howling back to their kennels. What are 50,000 Numidians? Aquilonia will swallow them up. They'll never see Belvaris again. It's not Aquilonia which was conquered at Valkia. It was only Conan. Aquilonia is doomed, answered Zaltatun, unmoved. Lance and axe and torch shall conquer her, or if they fail, powers from the dark of ages shall march against her. As the cliffs fell at Valkia, so shall walled cities and mountains fall if the need arise, and rivers roar from their channels to drown whole provinces. Better if steel and bowstring prevail without further aid from the arts, for the constant use of mighty spells sometimes sets forces in motion that might rock the universe. From what hell have you crawled, you knighted dog? Muttered Conan, staring at the man. The Cimmerian involuntarily shivered. He sensed something incredibly ancient and incredibly evil. Zaltatun lifted his head, as if listening to whispers across the void. He seemed to have forgotten his prisoner. Then he shook his head impatiently and glanced impersonally at Conan. What? Why, if I told you, you would not believe me. But I am wearied of conversation with you. It is less fatiguing to destroy a walled city than it is to frame my thoughts in words a brainless barbarian can understand. If my hands were free, opined Conan, I'd soon make a brainless corpse out of you. I do not doubt it, if I were fool enough to give you the opportunity, answered Zaltatun, clapping his hands. His manner had changed. There was impatience in his tone, and a certain nervousness in his manner, though Conan did not think that this attitude was in any way connected with himself. Consider what I have told you, Barbarian, said Zaltatun. You will have plenty of leisure. I have not yet decided what I shall do with you. It depends on circumstances yet unborn. But let this be impressed upon you, that if I decide to use you in my game, it will be better to submit without resistance than to suffer my wrath. Conan spat a curse at him, just as hangings that masked a door swung apart, and 4 giant men entered. Each was clad only in a silken breechcloth, supported by a girdle, from which hung a great key. Zaltatun gestured impatiently toward the king and turned away, as if dismissing the matter entirely from his mind. His fingers twitched queerly. From a carven green jade box, he took a handful of shimmering black dust and placed it in a brazier which stood on a golden tripod at his elbow. The crystal globe, which he seemed to have forgotten, fell suddenly to the floor, as if its invisible support had been removed. Well, Conan's the one who wears multiple girdles, remember? Although girdles seem to be a double-edged sword, or serpent. Then the men had lifted Conan, for so loaded with chains was he that he could not walk, and carried him from the chamber. A glance back, before the heavy, gold-bound teak door was closed, showed him Zaltatun leaning back in his throne-like chair, his arms folded, while a thin wisp of smoke curled up from the brazier. Conan's scalp prickled. In Stygia, that ancient and evil kingdom that lay far to the south, he had seen such black dust before. It was the pollen of the black lotus, which creates death-like sleep and monstrous dreams. And he knew that only the grisly wizards of the Black Ring, which is the nadir of evil, voluntarily seek the scarlet nightmares of the Black Lotus to revive their necromantic powers. The Black Ring was a fable and a lie to most folk of the Western world, but Conan knew of its ghastly reality, and its grim votaries who practiced their abominable sorceries amid the black vaults of Stygia and the nighted domes of accursed Sabatea. He glanced back at the cryptic gold-bound door, shuddering at what it hid. Whether it was day or night, the king could not tell. The palace of King Tarascus seemed a shadowy, nighted place that shunned natural illumination. The spirit of darkness and shadow hovered over it, and that spirit, Conan felt, was embodied in the stranger Zaltatun. The men carried the king along a winding corridor, so dimly lit that they moved through it like black ghosts bearing a dead man, and down a stone stair that wound endlessly. A torch in the hand of one cast the great deformed shadows streaming along the wall. It was like the descent into hell of a corpse borne by dusky demons. At last they reached the foot of the stair, and then they traversed a long, straight corridor, with a blank wall on one hand, pierced by an occasional arched doorway, with a stair leading up behind it, and on the other hand, another wall showing heavy barred doors at regular intervals of a few feet. Halting before one of these doors, one of the men produced the key that hung at his girdle and turned it in the lock. Then, pushing open the grille, they entered with their captive. They were in a small dungeon with heavy stone walls, floor and ceiling, and in the opposite wall there was another grilled door. What lay beyond that door Conan could not tell, but he did not believe it was another corridor. The glimmering light of the torch, flickering through the bars, hinted its shadowy spaciousness and echoing depths. In one corner of the dungeon, near the door through which they had entered, a cluster of rusty chains hung from a great iron ring set in the stone. In these chains a skeleton dangled. Conan glared at it with some curiosity, noticing the state of the bare bones, most of which were splintered and broken. The skull, which had fallen from the vertebrae, was crushed as if by some savage blow of tremendous force. Stolidly, one of the men, not the one who had opened the door, removed the chains from the ring, using his key on the massive lock, and dragged the mass of rusty metal and shattered bones over to one side. Then they fastened Conan's chains to that ring, and the third man turned his key in the lock of the farther door, grunting when he had assured himself that it was properly fastened. Well, yeah, I mean, if you have a magic girdle that protects you from sorcery, you should definitely wear the magic girdle. Then they regarded Conan cryptically. Slit-eyed giants, the torch striking highlights from their glossy skin. He who held the key to the nearer door was moved to remark gutturally, "This is your palace now, Dog King. None but master we know. All palace sleep. We keep secret. You live and die here, maybe. Like him." He contemptuously kicked the shattered skull and sent it clattering across the stone floor. Conan did not deign to reply to the taunt, and the man, galled perhaps by his prisoner's silence, muttered a curse, stooped and spat full in the king's face. It was an unfortunate move for the man. Conan was seated on the floor, the chains about his waist, ankles, and wrists locked to the ring in the wall. He could neither rise nor move more than a yard out from the wall. But there was considerable slack in the chains that shackled his wrists, and before the bullet-shaped head could be withdrawn out of reach, the king gathered this slack in his mighty hand and smote the man on the head. The man fell like a butchered ox, and his comrades stared to see him lying with his scalp laid open and blood oozing from his nose and ears. Yeah, don't get that close to Conan. But they attempted no reprisal, nor did they accept Conan's urgent invitation to approach within reach of the bloody chain in his hand. Presently, grunting in their... It was just a boob. Presently, grunting in their broken speech, they lifted the senseless man and bore him out like a sack of wheat, arms and legs dangling. They used his key to lock the door behind him, but did not remove it from the gold chain that fastened it to his girdle. They took the torch with them, and as they moved up the corridor, the darkness slunk behind them like an animate thing. Their soft padding footsteps died away with the glimmer of their torch, and darkness and silence remained unchallenged. In this context, I would say think like a broad belt, used for like keeping layers of armor and whatnot fastened in the right spots. And yes, girdle does get used a lot. But we'll pick up with the next chapter next Tuesday. Picture Jafar. I do not want to think of Jafar when I'm thinking of Conan. Also, I get the feeling Zaltatun is rather better looking than Jafar. Although I suppose we haven't heard whether Zaltatun's wearing a girdle or not. Anyway, I hope everyone enjoyed the story, and if you're listening and you haven't already, come join us in the Discord for story discussions, requests, feedback, and to connect to other people that are in the bedtime community. And yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow for the mysterious affair at Styles. And we'll see if we can figure out who the dastardly murderer is who killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. In any case, I hope you all have an excellent day or an excellent evening. So, good day or good night. And I'll see you again. Thank you very much for joining me. Don't forget to follow, and if you want to catch the older stuff, the link to the YouTube is on the Twitch page, and you can like and subscribe there and get some of the past stories if you'd like. All right. For those of you that care to join me, I'm going to jump into the bedtime Discord after this. We can chat if you'd like or hang out. All right.